Welcome, fellow castigators. Here we finally come to the end, where I watched The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death so that you don't have to. As you could tell from the title, I'm going to tear this thing apart, and I'm going to do it bit by bit. The Legend of Ruby Sunday begins with the TARDIS dramatically flying into unit headquarters. The Doctor and Ruby exit and are greeted by that absolute linebacker, Jason, who works at UNIT now despite being a school dropout with no specialties. We're also introduced to Morris, a tiny 13-year-old genius on a Segway, whose speech is almost entirely unintelligible. The Doctor abruptly begins talking about Susan Twist, the actress who appears to be following them. This is incredibly sudden, as thus far the characters have only mentioned it casually in passing. This time, she's a tech mogul, Susan Triad of S-Triad Technologies, which is obviously an anagram for TARDIS. They keep ramping up the tension in this scene, but it just feels weird because we have no reason to believe that Susan Triad is evil, or even a problem. The Doctor thinks that perhaps Susan is his granddaughter Susan, which doesn't make sense for 3 reasons. Firstly, Susan usually goes by the surname Foreman, after the junkyard where the TARDIS landed. Secondly, Susan is Gallifreyan, but had not been awarded the title of Time Lady and the ability to regenerate. Although I suppose in this warped version of Doctor Who, regeneration is just biologically inherent to the Doctor and would presumably be passed to Susan. Thirdly, the Doctor left Susan on a ruined Earth in the 22nd century, and it's unlikely that she would have been able to leave. Regardless, the Doctor explains regeneration to Ruby and keeps comparing it to a disguise, which is funny because the Doctor has never used it to hide. Next, we learn that everyone's favorite companion, Mel, has been working for Susan Triad to try to gather intel. Kate Stewart reports that Susan is actually really nice, which should be such a surprise considering they have no reason to believe otherwise. The Doctor announces in the most cringy way possible that they will also be trying to find Ruby's mother. Why now? Who knows, but how convenient that it will tie into the main problem later. The Doctor says he can't go back to when Ruby's mom dropped her off, but can't he just go before? He knows which direction she came from, so can't he go back in time and follow her before she reaches the church? He's looped himself many times before. Regardless, the Doctor decides that they will use UNIT's time window to watch the event. So Ruby goes back to her flat to get the CCTV footage that she has on VHS. Ruby's adopted mother decides to go back to UNIT with her, leaving Mrs. Flood to care for Ruby's grandmother. Mrs. Flood begins to act ominously and refuses to make tea. Back at UNIT, the Doctor tells Kate that although he has a granddaughter, he does not have a daughter, chalking it up to the life of a Time Lord. Except for a few important things. In Tomb of the Cybermen, the second Doctor mentions that his family is gone. In The Final Hour, the 8th Doctor says that he had at least one child. In Fear Her, the 10th Doctor says that he was once a father. In Hellbent, the 12th Doctor states that Susan was the daughter of whoever was the president of the High Council of Gallifrey at that time, so either the Doctor's daughter was president or married the president. Most importantly, there is an episode in Russell T Davies' first era called The Doctor's Daughter, where the Doctor explicitly states that his children died fighting in the Time War. Furthermore, we see the Doctor's new daughter, Jenny, blast off into space. Who's to say that she didn't make it to Gallifrey and give birth to Susan? It's unlikely, as you'd think the Doctor would then recognize Jenny when she comes out at the progenitor machine, but still, you'd think Russell T Davies would take advantage of this and run with it. Anyway, Ncuti Gatwa then cries about something that I can't remember, and Kate consoles him like a child. We then learn that Mel has gathered some of Susan Triad's DNA, which confirms her as human. The gang go 10 floors down to the time window, which the Doctor characteristically makes fun of in an uncharacteristic way. The tiny genius wires the VHS tape to the time window and turns it on. The time window is nothing like any previous time window in the show, and the Doctor tells Ruby that the time window is dangerous, and that they cannot move around in it, but does not explain why. Despite this, the drama was being properly ramped up, between the acting and Murray Gold's music. However, the Doctor ruins it by suddenly trying to be a hype man again. The time window shows the Doctor arriving at the church, where Ruby's mother turns around and seemingly points at him. The Doctor says that he doesn't know why, and that his memory of the event keeps changing for some reason. A nebulous cloud appears around the TARDIS, so Morris turns the time window off. They find that the unit soldier that was in there with the Doctor and Ruby has turned to sand. Mel and the Doctor take Mel's motorcycle to meet Susan Triad, who the Doctor still hopes is his granddaughter. The Doctor punches an elevator in rage and then slumps to the floor. Mel tells him to get a grip and then takes him to see Susan. The Doctor approaches her and says the funniest serious line in the whole season.
Do you dream about being an ambulance?
Unit analyzes the nebulous cloud on the tape and sees the TARDIS at the center, so they can scan the real TARDIS and find that there is indeed an invisible cloud surrounding the TARDIS. Kate introduces herself to the cloud, which materializes as Sutekh, the mad siren thought to be defeated once and for all by the Fourth Doctor in Pyramid of Mars. As we see the words Susan and Tech combined to form Sutekh, the Doctor quips that he had the wrong anagram in mind. Except combining two words and misspelling both is not an anagram at all. We're told that the Toymaker is the god of games, the Trickster is the god of traps, the Mara is the god of beasts, Maestro is the god of music, and therefore Sutekh is the god of death. You'd think that the Trickster would be the god of, tricks, and that the Mara would be the god of dreams, but whatever. Also, if the Osirans were a race of godlike beings that dominated other species, wouldn't Sutekh as the god of death be more of a random title in the pantheon of Osiran gods, instead of a singular creature that belongs to a grab bag of other dissimilar gods with ultra-specific and nonsensical focuses? How does one even become a god? What's the point of these characters? Why can't they just be aliens like before? And with that stupidity, the legend of Ruby Sunday ends. What an extreme waste of time. RTD didn't give us anything to chew on other than the Sutekh reveal. I know it's the first part of a two-part story, but usually you give the audience a good chunk of story instead of having the characters run around in circles discovering nothing for 45 minutes. It's like Russell doesn't know how to fill time with meaningful and important events. At least Sutekh is still voiced by Gabriel Wolfe after all this time. That's about all I can say for this episode. Might as well move on to Empire of Death, where things actually happen. The story begins with Susan Triad turning people into sand, and Unit shooting Sutekh, including Morris, who amazingly does not fly backwards across the room. Kate and the rest of Unit are then also turned to sand. The Doctor and Mel race away from the sandstorm as Mrs. Flood, Ruby's gran, and Ruby's mum all turn to sand. I thought the mummy robots were more fun, honestly. Ruby, Mel, and the Doctor enter the time window, and the Doctor inspects the VHS TARDIS, which is inexplicably the memory TARDIS from the Tales of the TARDIS miniseries. For those who don't know, Tales of the TARDIS was a soft canon series that had old Doctors and old companions reunite to bookend re-airings of classic episodes. It's super weird. It's like if they canonized Sylvester McCoy's host segments from the Hartnell years VHS.
But that's another story.
The Doctor says that the TARDIS is remembering itself, which is odd. Did the TARDIS forget itself? Sutekh appears in the time window and is nice enough not to kill the Doctor and co., despite the minions trying very hard to kill them earlier. Ruby asks who Sutekh is, and the Doctor says that Sutekh is the greatest foe that he's ever fought, which I don't think is even remotely true. Russell has a thing about hyping up villains with false platitudes instead of just showing us how dangerous they are. Sutekh says that after his defeat, he latched onto the TARDIS and has been riding it ever since, all the while evolving to true godhood somehow. Susan Triad is a manifestation of Sutekh, following the Doctor and Ruby wherever they go. In Pyramid of Mars, the Doctor, in 1911, traps Sutekh in a time-space tunnel, a device that is presumably different from the pure time vortex, as a person can pass through it without dying. The Doctor extends the time tunnel to the far future, acknowledging that Sutekh will die before reaching that point in time. This, of course, means that there is no way that Sutekh could have grabbed hold of the TARDIS. Not only was he within the confines of the time tunnel, Sutekh never successfully reached the Priory in 1911. The next story, The Android Invasion, has the TARDIS going forward in time from 1911, which means Sutekh could not have grabbed on in 1911 and couldn't have caught up with them before dying. It's almost like Russell T. Davies was counting on fans to remember Pyramid of Mars well enough to clap for Sutekh, but not so well that they'd see the glaring contradictions with the story. Anyway, the Doctor somehow physically flies the remembered TARDIS out of the time window with Ruby and Mel inside. It kind of springs forth the awkward fact that Mel does not have her own Tales of the TARDIS episode, as her Doctors were with their admittedly more prominent companions, Perry and Ace. The Doctor reminds Ruby about the intelligent gloves from their first adventure and introduces her to the intelligent rope, but he does not describe what that means or explain how it works. He also says the TARDIS perception filter reaches 73 yards, which I don't think is right. I'm pretty sure they've been farther from the TARDIS than that and still had alien languages being translated for them. The TARDIS appears over Earth, which is slowly turning to dust. The Doctor says that every place he has ever visited since picking up Sutekh is also turning into dust, and then he cries and screams into space, thus proving the tagline of Alien wrong. The show then abruptly cuts to the Doctor perusing a planet covered in sand, and he meets a woman who says that memory is dying. I guess that's because the Doctor visited the planet in the past and now its history is fading? But they don't really say. The woman gives the Doctor a spoon, and then the Doctor cries as the woman turns to dust.
Start? I don't feel so good.
Back on the TARDIS, the Doctor inserts the spoon into the TARDIS view screen. He says that it needed some metal from the real world. I don't know why he didn't just stick one of his rings in there or any of the jewelry that Ruby and Mel are wearing. The view screen flashes between images of Sutekh and the CCTV footage of Ruby's mother. The Doctor guesses that Sutekh hasn't killed them yet because he can't comprehend why he couldn't see Ruby's mother, and wants to know who she is. I feel like that's a severe jump to conclusions, but whatever, mate. We see that Sutekh is watching the conversation through Mel, and then suddenly the screen shows Mad Jack from 73 yards. The Doctor says they can find Ruby's mom in 2046 because Mad Jack does a compulsory DNA test of every citizen for some reason. This seems to imply that he's still going to destroy Earth in the future, but I guess we're ignoring that for now. They land in 2046, where the Doctor accesses a government computer and uses a sonic screwdriver to get through the security. He sends Mel to keep watch and puts Ruby's blood into a pull-out tray in the screwdriver. It snows inside as the computer successfully finds a match. Mel is suddenly possessed by Sutek, and then the gang are teleported back to Unit HQ, where Sutek uses his green mind powers to incapacitate the Doctor, which is consistency that I appreciate. Ruby offers to show Sutek who her mother is, and approaches him with the screen. As she moves to hold up the screen and flip it around, she smashes it against the floor, which was actually pretty baller. I genuinely wasn't expecting that. Ruby then attaches the intelligent rope to Sutek, and the Doctor uses a whistle to activate the real TARDIS. A freaking laser beam fires out of the console and destroys Sutek's minion. The Doctor then attaches the other side of the rope to the TARDIS console and begins to drag Sutek through the time vortex. They're really lucky that at no point did Sutek use any of his powers to kill them through all that. The time vortex begins to kill Sutek, even though it never did before. The Doctor says that if you bring death to death, you create life, and everyone on Earth begins to revive. First of all, two wrongs don't make a right, and secondly, this seems to imply that killing Sutek will bring back anyone that he killed. Why would that work? Are any of the characters from Pyramids of Mars alive now? If Sutek is the god of death, then presumably he has control over it.
I have the power of life and death over all of you!
So how come he couldn't keep himself from dying? Could people even die anymore? Was Sutek like the Grim Reaper and now everyone who has ever died is back? Are there any rules to any of this nonsense? If the Doctor has now literally conquered death, does that make him Jesus? Russell loves to explain things with vague throwaway lines, so you're never going to get any answers. The Doctor shuts the door, which severs the intelligent rope, and Sutek incinerates in the time vortex. Why didn't the vortex kill him before? Hanging on to the TARDIS certainly doesn't protect you, as proved by Captain Jack Harkness's temporary death in RTD's own episode Utopia. The Doctor and Ruby return to Unit, where, despite being created by Sutek, Susan Triad is alive and well. Unit finds Ruby's birth mother's Instagram photos, and the Doctor says that Ruby's mom was invisible because she was important to Ruby, and that created a Harry Potter love shield bullshit. As it turns out, Ruby's mother was pointing to the Ruby Road signpost to indicate Ruby's name. If that's the case, who was she pointing for? In the flashback, we see that the church people have not picked up Ruby yet. And if Ruby's mother had turned around, then she would have seen the Doctor, which would have created an entirely different scene. It's said that the social workers named Ruby after where she was found, and you can't tell me they saw the CCTV footage because then they would have seen the TARDIS materialize, which yet again would have created an entirely different scene. Speaking of which, why didn't Ruby or her adoptive mother ever see the TARDIS in the CCTV footage? The time window clearly shows us that it was in the shot. I don't understand why the pointing is even a plot point. Russell is just throwing random stuff in. Anyhow, the Doctor takes Ruby to meet her mother in a coffee shop, and they have a tearful reunion. Ruby suggests that the Doctor find Susan, but the Doctor says he doesn't know where to start looking. Maybe start where you dropped her off, idiot. The Doctor cries as Ruby leaves, and then the TARDIS dematerializes. We then see Mrs. Flood on a rooftop talking directly into the camera. She tells us that the Doctor will die in terror, and then this ridiculous season finale finally ends. Yikes! The second season finale where Russell T Davies uses the TARDIS as a tow truck. Except this time he leashes a dog to the back of his vehicle and drags it along until it dies. Brutal! Now I have to ask, why did Sutek wait until now to reveal himself? Did he only do it because Unit caught him, or was he just waiting for his moment? What was his original plan anyway? Why did he stay attached to the TARDIS the whole time? How did he survive everything that has happened to the TARDIS? I don't need every little thing explained to me. I only ask for just enough to suspend my disbelief. Some technobabble, some science fiction mumbo-jumbo at least. Instead, all we get is that Ruby's mom was a normal person this whole time, and nothing meant anything. Russell says that his inspiration was Rey's parents being nobody in Rise of Skywalker, which is an incredibly stupid move because everyone was mad about it, and the movie didn't make its money back. All that lead up for nothing won't satisfy anyone. Worst of all, it sacrifices Ruby's character development to turn her into a plot device that doesn't go anywhere. Millie Gibson, plays Ruby just fine, but she has no distinct or unique character traits to speak of. She just exists to be a mystery and to materialize snow that Russell never fully explains. We've gotten all the way to the end, and every thread running through the season was just an exercise in futility. Ruby's parentage didn't mean anything, and the Susan twist resolution was hardly clever. I mean, Susan Tech? Really? Sue Tech? What is going on with you, Russell? Do you just turn in the first draft of every screenplay? Was your original time as showrunner just a big fluke? Did you kill all your brain cells from too much autoerotic asphyxiation over the years? Now, I have no delusions about Russell's writing. I know that the majority of his highest rated episodes were by Stephen Moffat or other writers on the staff, and he's definitely written plenty of things to piss me off over the years, but nothing as absurdly egregious as a season finale where everything contradicts everything. It goes without saying that it constantly contradicts canon, especially the classic series episode that it sequels, but every plot point is an argument with every other plot point. It's even worse that the whole plot is hinged on Sutekh hilariously being interested in the mystery of Ruby's mother. I guess no one else the TARDIS ever encountered was considered important enough by their daughter to create a shielding spell that bamboozled Sutekh. And why are the foundations of Sutekh's motivations explained so poorly? This is overall such a waste of Sutekh. We don't get to see any of his personality, he hardly does anything, and the story doesn't add anything to his character. There's no point in the villain of the story even being Sutekh. It could have easily been reworked to be Mara or the Trickster or anyone else. Hell, you could have brought back Syl and it wouldn't have made much of a difference. What was the point if you weren't going to do something fun like bring back the robot mummies or the groovy time tunnel? Furthermore, it's not much fun when you don't have the Doctor actually doing anything. He spouts exposition about Susan and Ruby. He cries while talking to Kate, gets someone killed in the time window. He cries and then punches an elevator. He ignores the danger at Unit because he's too busy asking Susan if she dreams of being an ambulance. And then Unit dies. He runs away from Sutekh and lets the Earth die. He cries and screams. Then he gets a spoon from a woman and cries. He tests Ruby's blood, gets pwned by Sutekh. Ruby saves the day as the silly man just whistles, and then finally he cries as Ruby leaves. This Doctor is a pretty pathetic excuse for a hero. He's always screwing up, always running away, always blubbering. It's okay for the Doctor to cry every once in a while. It's okay for heroes to be vulnerable, but it really loses its impact when it's happening every other scene. He just comes off as a big, whiny loser who throws a tantrum every time he's frustrated. I think it's a huge disservice to Ncuti Gatwa that the first gay doctor is portrayed as a limp-wristed, effeminate crybaby who needs to have everything sorted out for him by a gaggle of women. I don't think Russell T Davies has any self-awareness to speak of. Russell said he wanted a new, energetic doctor without the weight of trauma, but in a contradictory attempt to make him more vulnerable, he accidentally created a doctor who appears significantly more fragile than any of his predecessors. I can't help but think that Ncuti Gatwa suits this version of the Doctor. His inexperience as an actor seems to play rather well with the inexperience of this Doctor as a man. If that was what Russell was going for, then it was a rousing success, but it doesn't make him any less insufferable to watch for the audience. He's so weirdly detached from what's happening and so loosely involved that in most scenes he just ends up feeling like a very annoying narrator for someone else's show. He's hardly convincing as a lead when all he does is stand there and explain the things that the audience already knows. As a matter of fact, all the characters have a terrible habit of habitually stating the obvious. These characters do not speak like real people, and it never feels like you really get to know any one person. They just talk and talk and talk, while in actuality communicating nothing of substance, and they end up doing very little. Kate is just there to be the face of UNIT and accomplishes nothing. Morris exists to do the Doctor's job for him, and accomplish very little. Harriet Arbinger exists to be another stupid word pun and save money on Sutek's CGI, and she accomplishes nothing. Jason exists to be called gorgeous, and he accomplishes nothing. The Vlinks just exists and accomplishes nothing. Ruby's family exists to fill the runtime with talking, and they accomplish nothing. Ruby's biological mom exists to be a plot point that accomplishes nothing. Susan Triad exists to include intrigue in the series with incredibly poor payoff. Mel is the only one to do anything useful, and even then her character could be replaced by just about any classic series companion, and you wouldn't even have to change any of her lines. It's just a waste of Mel, honestly. This whole thing is stuffed to the brim with characters who just talk uselessly when you could cut most of them and have things actually happen in your story. You could have room for actual character development and actual meaning. It could feel like you actually witnessed a full, satisfying story, instead of the Doctor going in circles and crying about everything. Murray Gold wrote a great new theme for this Doctor, and you barely hear it, because nothing exciting enough ever happens. In fact, you only ever hear it once over the entire course of these 2 episodes. This show is so rarely triumphant, and I can't help feeling jilted by how absurdly uninteresting it is. I'm even more jilted by the amount of people who ask me why I care. When someone breaks into your house and starts bashing your TV with a baseball bat, you don't just move away, you fight for it. This is my house and I'm gonna fight for it, damn it! I've heard just about everything from you degenerates. I've gotten comments saying that Doctor Who was never science fiction. I've gotten comments saying that murder isn't wrong. I've even gotten comments claiming that the classic series is stupid, so that excuses this series of being stupid. And you know what? Keep trying, morons. You can keep telling me I'm wrong all you like. You can keep being all like, oh, Russell is just warming up. Everything he does is so wonderful. Wild Blue Yonder was so scary. 73 Yards was brilliant, and I'm the only one who really gets it. I just love to lick Ncuti Gatwa's butthole. I always knew who Sutek was. I'm such a fan. Because the reality is that the more you say stuff like that, the harder you lose. That's right, you refuse to ask for better, and now no one watches it. The show has just gotten worse and worse, and your cowardly complacency will drive it right out of existence. You are so pathetically afraid of being called a racist, a sexist, or a homophobe that you refuse to identify the slop in front of you. You claim that you just love Doctor Who so much. Well, now there won't be anything left. So when this show inevitably gets canceled again and you're blaming all the cis white males for all of the pain that you have wrought, just know that this is a failure of your devising. It's your fault. You did this. You clapped like a seal for Chris Chibnall. You clapped like a seal for Jodie Whittaker. You hailed Russell T Davies as your Lord and Savior, and now he has spat on you. You gave into the madness because he promised to validate all of your superficial insecurities. Your deviant sexualities, your petty gender squabbles, your desire to be the victim so that you can continue justifying being an evil person, and your secret hatred of those who have achieved success in institutions that you, in your sweaty squalor, couldn't cheat or subvert your way towards no matter how hard your greasy, indolent fingers tried. The truth is that Doctor Who, in its original state, can never appeal to pitiful little hags like you, who have to resort to calling people racist on the internet in order to feel better about your empty, loveless lives. You could have chosen to let Doctor Who continue, but instead you chose to indulge your selfish desires for things that, deep down, you know are not healthy to have. You want so desperately to feel normal, accepted, but you don't deserve to feel normal, you disgusting cretin. You deserve to be scraped off the bottom of my shoe like the acrid, festering fungus that you are. The irony is that the more you live simply to consume, to feed yourself and your bad habits, the farther and farther you get from true satisfaction. This season has been far from satisfactory. Just minutes upon minutes of happenstances without substance or feeling. Russell was so focused on pushing his agenda and his fantasies that he forgot to write something that even qualifies as a real story. The characters are less developed than his jawline, and the plot is thinner than his hairline, every cringy moment like every blot on his dry, scabby face. Russell has done every actor in this a disservice, reeling them in with new age politics and spitting them out with garbage characterizations that make them look bad. He has done every talented crew member a disservice as they work through blood, sweat, and tears, and deadlines to beautifully present Russell's very first draft. This is one of the most inadequate, feeble, and deplorable attempts at writing that I have ever had the displeasure of experiencing, and it makes me inordinately upset that he went out of his way to sacrifice Doctor Who to deliver it. Russell couldn't just stay in his corner. He was so insecure about not being heard that he had to destroy something big to get mainstream attention, and the viewing figures show that he didn't even succeed. It was all for nothing. Doctor Who meant so much to so many people, and it was destroyed for nothing. So I'm not done. This isn't over. I'll be back to watch the Christmas special so that you don't have to. If you want to save yourself the time, energy, and sanity of doing that, then you can subscribe, and I promise I'll continue roasting this series and other unforgivable travesties throughout the rest of the year. Thanks for listening.